present, and emerging. This evening, we're delighted to welcome our guest speaker, Sally Holliday. Sally says the Transpersonal Art Therapy has allowed her to work through life's diminishing experiences and rewrite her story in ways that are life-enhancing. Sally is a practicing transpersonal art therapist and counsellor. During her training with the College of Complementary Medicine, she explored Jungian theories of self, including archetypes, individuation, self-realisation, and integration. Sally works with individual clients and groups to dialogue with herself through art, utilising image, symbol, and metaphor to create images, maps of personal significance and meaning, inspired by Jung's mandalas exploration. Sally's presentation will go for an hour, then we'll have a short break and resume for discussion and questions. Note that we'll be recording this event for later reference. If you're here on Zoom, please remain muted while Sally is speaking. Use Zoom chat for comments, and we'll open up later for discussion. And also welcome to those people online. And thank you, Sally. It's lovely to have you. We've known Sally for a while because we've developed, Robert and I and quite a few other people have been developing the garden at Grevillea Park near the hospice. And Sally's been our inspiration, coming along with her work team and pulling out those dreadful weeds and horrible things we don't want in the garden. Thank you so much.
Robert, can we change the music?
There shouldn't be any music.
There certainly is some music, and I'm finding it's making me very sleepy and relaxed, and I need to be on my bed.
That's how we started this morning.
That's right. That must be
Try a few little bits of tech here. I did come a month ago to suss out what the format here was like, and clinging to a lectern is not really my style. I tend to move around a bit. So we're trying the roving mic, but it was a little bit whistly before. How's that for everyone in the room? Is that okay? I do project quite well, I think, but if you can't hear me, please stop and wave. And thanks very much to Jean for inviting me. It was my pleasure to meet Jean and Robert in the garden originally, and I think lots of good conversations happen in the garden. And we got chatting about art therapy and what I was studying, and Jean was like, oh, you should come along to the Jungian Society, have a chat. And I thought, oh gosh, I don't know if I'm ready for that. But that was quite a while ago now, and I have since graduated and I'm moving into my practitioner kind of sphere now. So really wanting to honour that I'm an emerging practitioner. And I really am, you know, using this forum tonight in a safe space to kind of have a bit of a chat about some of the things that oscillate for me as a practitioner. And I'm welcoming this as a conversation. So it's not just me talking at you for an hour. If you have questions throughout, if you have a burning, you know, curiosity, please just sing out and we'll have it more of a conversation and a dialogue. I also want to acknowledge First Nations people, particularly Ngunnawal people here in this kind of Canberra region. We've been yarning on country, taking care of country for about 60,000 years. And it's my privilege to continue that caring for country role. And I also acknowledge that storytelling and creativity and art making has always been part of that culture. And what I'm doing is not necessarily anything new. If anything, I'm remembering how to do it. All right, so who am I? Let's start with the basics. I'm a human, so we have something in common in this room already. I want you to gently just close your eyes if you feel comfortable, or just soften your gaze for a minute and just reflect, just for 20 seconds or so. If I asked you what were the 10 ingredients that make up you, if I could distill you and put you in a bottle, what would be in there? Just take a moment just to consider, what are your key ingredients for you? And perhaps moving past those labels or associations that are really familiar to us, our roles that we live out on a day-to-day basis. But what about the essence underneath some of those roles? And that's all for you to just hold on to for now. Don't open your eyes. So tonight I'm fulfilling the role of orator, for example. So orator is, you know, an archetypal type role of somebody who's telling a story, who's got the mic, who's at the front of the room. And so I'm having to step into that particular role for this evening. But what's underneath it is that I'm actually very nervous, and I might not translate that outwardly to you in the room. So we're in this constant dance always between our inner world and our outer world, the face that we're putting out into the world and our inner landscape that we're actually inhabiting within. And that's going to continue throughout my presentation. So if we were to ask Jung who I am, he would probably point to two archetypes, the creator and the caregiver or the nurturer. And these are roles that have definitely informed my life to date and certainly informed my transpersonal art therapy practice as well. And this is shown in my logo, my business logo, which I thought I'd take a moment to identify as a sign or symbol of how I go about putting myself out in the world with this offering. You can see above there's 3 artworks there with a sort of anatomical heart motif, and that just kept coming up throughout my 2 years of art therapy studies as a symbol that was just somehow calling to me that it needed to be used. And also the 4 seasons tree as well, or in Aboriginal culture, it's actually not 4 seasons, it's more like 6. But the idea of transitioning from one form to another and observing the changes throughout the seasons. And we as humans also experience these seasons and cycles. So that's why I've chosen my business name, Seasons of Self, because I believe that the onus is on the person showing up to understand their own seasons and cycles from within, not from me to prescribe from without. So I just want to talk a little bit about the idea of temenos. You might have heard of it before, but we really use that in art therapy and counselling as a grounding or a landing mat, a welcome mat for the client when they come in. And I've created a temenos at the back of the room there with some objects on relating to tonight and the sort of journey that I want to take you on. So that was really designed to both ground me when I arrived in setting that up and just fully letting me anchor into the space, but then also for you to arrive when you came in the door and to have something to anchor into as well. So it's something that you can do for yourself at home to create a temenos. Sometimes it's also called like an altar. It's a place to put your attention and to put objects that you want to carry the energy from. I've got some examples of temenos here. This is another one. This was about seasons and cycles again, and moving through the metamorphosis of a butterfly and a chrysalis and that kind of thing. And this one was about going on a journey, the idea of the heroic journey. So I've got my grandfather's passport in there. My mum will recognise that. And a book by Sean Tan called The Arrival, which I just think it's all pictures, no words. Has a really great way for the client to explore the idea of adventure and so on. So you can really change this temenos, but the temenos itself, the idea of the temenos as a safe, sacred space to return to and anchor into, remains the same. So transpersonal art therapy. There are lots of different kinds of theories out there, but the transpersonal model is what I was trained in through the College of Complementary Medicine. So it was a 2-year course, online mostly, and then I did some face-to-face practicum as well. The idea with the transpersonal method is that it was really born out of the late 60s, early 70s. So it's sort of post-humanism movement and carries lots of those same ideals. But it really boils down to the Latin separation of the word in 2 parts, trans, meaning beyond or to move, and then the persona were the traditional Greek exaggerated face masks that you might have seen, the very big frowns and the very big garish smiles. And the idea behind that was that you couldn't really tell what the actor's face was doing because the mask was so distracting and absorbing. And so the idea with the transpersonal or trans persona is to move beyond the mask, to move beyond the ego, the way we put ourselves out in the world, and to discover the layers behind that. It does particularly relate to consciousness and the idea that when we're in our ordinary states of consciousness, we're probably going to snap into our normal ego. But if we're able to transcend beyond that through different methods, guided visualization, hypnosis, music, different states, getting our body into either an elevated state or a more relaxed state, that we are able to then transition beyond that normal state of ego. And it does have a lot of influence from the Eastern spirituality kind of movement, and also from traditional Indigenous medicine and shamanism, that kind of thing. And one continuous kind of image that we return to in the transpersonal is this idea of the well. So when you lower your bucket into the well, you're dipping into a deep underground stream. That's always there, it's under your feet, but only once you actually lower your bucket and consciously try and retrieve from the well can you pull up that resource. So the idea of a stream of consciousness, and that we can step in and out of that stream of consciousness, and we can go deeper or shallower in that stream of consciousness. That's really what's preoccupied with the transpersonal method. So I'm constantly trying to help my client access their own inner well, their personal unconscious, and I'm also wanting them to tap into the collective unconscious, the shared, I guess, human and life experience that we all have, to go beyond the ego. And that can very much involve dreams, because dreams are the an untainted font by which we tap into that subconscious or unconscious. When we're dreaming, we're not mitigated by our surroundings and expectations of others and so on. We really are in our purest form with ourself, and the self is allowed to channel through in our dreams. So I've always dreamed very vividly, but since taking this course, I have a brand new appreciation of dreams. I keep a dream journal. I have a dream incubation pot where I actually put my wishes and intentions into it. The more attention I seem to give to my dreams, the more my dreams start to really speak to me and offer me guidance and wisdom and advice. So it's really quite a special experience. And for those of you who don't think that you can remember your dreams, or you don't have visual imagery, everybody dreams, whether you remember it or not is kind of more the matter. So whether we can help you to remember your dreams. I like the little cartoon about the cockroach imagining that he was cat. That's my little dream incubation point there. And obviously in our dreams, we're often looking for symbolism, and we're looking for these archetypes, these kinds of recurrent stories that show up. And these are just some of the divination cards that I made as part of my course, looking at a few different archetypes, for example. And we may move in and out of these archetypes. We are not fixed. So I'm a Virgo, I'm born in August, and that's my supposed fixed sign, but I can move in and out of all of these different archetypes, and how I am with my mum versus how I am with my partner versus how I am with work versus how I am with Robert and Jean in the garden. I will be shifting perhaps through these different ways of being. And it's important to pay attention to those shifts and see, when does this archetype show up? When does this behaviour show up? When do these actions come to the surface? So yeah, I invite you to have a look at some of the cards, and I've got my interpretive book up there if you want to give yourself a little reading at halftime. We can do that. There we go. I threatened to move. So when we are stepping into the role of therapist, it's very deliberate that we are not offering to step into the healer archetype. The client is the healer of their own journey, and we are accompanying them. And there's a lot of therapy out there that could be seen as a silver bullet, a quick fix, just go through the motions and you'll be, right? This is considered an ongoing journey, and it's about equipping the client with skills to then navigate through their own life. So we have to be very careful not to step into that role of wanting to fix the client. We're just wanting the client to see themselves, and our job is really a mirror to hold up in front of the client and say, do you see what I see? And when we're doing that, of course, it's a very vulnerable place for the client. So we're really trying to uphold these 3 principles here outlined by Carl Rogers in his person-centered approach. We want to have congruence, which means we want to show up authentically with our client. We want to have unconditional positive regard for our clients. So even if they're doing something that we don't particularly agree with, kind of behaviour, or they have a particular belief system that we don't adopt, we still give the client unconditional positive regard. And we show empathy. And with empathy, we have to be very careful not to make the client's issues our own. And this is something that I'm learning to cultivate as a skill, as an empath. My job is to be with the client, not become the client. So I can stand on one side of the gate and I can wave over the gate and I can dialogue over the fence, but my job is not to go through the gate. Because once I'm through the gate, I'm on their side and I cannot help them from an objective point of view. So that's something I'm really learning. And we call it companioning, which I think is a really beautiful way of thinking about it. So clients may come to therapy presenting with a variety of different problems. And no 2 clients are the same, obviously, even though we see recurrent issues crop up. So it's important that even if it's the 100th time I'm dealing with a particular kind of issue, that I'm not treating it as if I understand the issue from the client's point of view. And you can see that, you know, from any given day, you don't know necessarily what's coming through the door. So that's why things like temenos, anchoring yourself, having that really calm center is really important, because you just don't know what you're going to be holding when you are space holding. And I put this little diagram there. I quite like it. She's a girl I follow on Instagram. This diagram is entitled "The Part of Me That's Left for Me." And I think that's what a lot of clients come with, is they've actually lost themselves in all these different roles and all these different duties and responsibilities, and they've actually lost what is their essence. Where's the me for me? I have no time for me. And I have to be careful not to let that happen to me as a therapist when I'm holding space for all my clients, trying to find space for them, right? So it's a bit of a dance. So I keep this little diagram in the back of my mind. I just want to delineate and distinguish the difference between therapeutic arts practice and art as therapy. So therapeutic art practice might be something like colouring in a mandala, or doing a watercolour painting outdoors, or doing a knitting or a crochet, any of these kinds of whittling a spoon, whatever your hobbies and interests are that are creative, that give you that kind of therapeutic relief. They're cathartic in their own way. They're intrinsically cathartic. But I'm not, when you're whittling a spoon, I'm not asking you to also tell me about your childhood and your deep existential crisis. So that's the difference between art therapy and art as therapy, or therapeutic arts and art as therapy. When clients are coming to me to work specifically on their personal journey and their stories, their issues, I'm really focusing on what creative outlet is going to be the best exploration tool for them to deal with that issue. And I'll talk a little bit about the intrinsic intelligence of materials to help with that. So if I have a client who's grappling with a lot, like I've got a lot of different things going on, I'm going to want to try and contain and bring that in for them. So that's when I might work within a mandala, for example, with a contained circle, and say, all right, we're going to put this particular issue here and confine it. If I've got a client who's transitioning through something and really needs to understand, well, it's first was like this and now it's moving into this, maybe something like clay that actually allows you to shapeshift from one form to another. It's not fixed, and they can get that embodied sense of what that's like to then move and shapeshift and create that change. If you work with a pencil, it's got a very sharp tip and it's quite defined. So it's going to ask of your brain for quite an acute thinking style. Whereas if I ask you to work in collage and you're ripping and tearing and you're just putting these different textures and patterns down, there's no pressure on you to actually articulate your thoughts with a fine line. So I'm constantly working with the client to discern what materials are we going to work with here given this issue. If a client's very emotional, for example, watercolor can be great because they can just cry straight into it. And the water comes from their face and becomes part of the artwork. It's nothing to hide. So they can really actually use that, and it can be something quite transformative. So it can include a whole variety of different things, I guess. And what I encourage you to do is like shelve your idea of what you think art is and what it looks like in the context of therapy. Anything goes. It can be really quite amazing. So the main features that actually anchor you into your art therapy experience are these. So it's phenomenological. And when I talk about phenomenological, it's a big word, but what it pretty much means, it relates to direct personal experience, and it's got none of the layers of external stuff coming into it. It's purely you. So if I was to take this artwork here, for example, and describe it to you phenomenologically, I'm not going to say it's a woman with a maze on her head, because that's me interpreting what I think it is based on my existing experience. If I'm going to describe it phenomenologically, I might say, I have to look at it while I'm doing it. I might say something like, in the top half of this image, there's a recurring pattern that is quite concentrated in one area. So can you see how that's like, I'm just describing the phenomena. I'm not actually putting any meaning on top of that whatsoever. And this becomes really important when you're with a client, because we have a tendency to map onto an image what we think it means. So with analysis, we're actually trying to figure out what it means. But the problem is we're doing that through our lens, not through the client's lens. So I might have, for example, a client who makes an image and I think it looks like a snake. And I might be like, you know, oh yeah, tell me more about the snake. She'd be like, oh no, that's actually my stream of consciousness. It's nothing to do with the snake, right? So it was very unhelpful for me to map my interpretation onto their artwork. So it's really interesting when you actually then lean into the client. This is really good when you're working with children as well. Instead of saying, oh, I love what you did with the sun, that looks great. And they go, it's actually a table and chairs. It's my dining room that I've drawn. Oh, sorry. You know, so you can say, tell me more about that. This is interesting. What's this shape? You know, and you can get them to then unpack it for you rather than you mapping your experience onto it. It's hermeneutic. So hermeneutic means that the meaning is highly contextual. So again, relevant to that client. So if I have a client who comes in and says, oh, this thing happened to me this week and it was really distressing and I'm just devastated, I could say the word back to them, devastated. And just hold that, just reflect that. That's the phenomena, devastation. I know what devastating feels like for me, but what does it feel like for my client? So if I was saying devastated, they'd be like, oh yeah, you know, this has happened all the time and I'm just fed up and I'm over it. Oh, that's interesting. Like that's a bit of a different angle than this has, you know, changed my life immeasurably. And you might ask questions like, tell me what devastated means for you, or what's the significance of this particular event in your life? That's how it becomes hermeneutic. And the difference is with analysis versus appreciation as well, is that we're really trying to just appreciate the client's experience rather than judge it in any way. So it doesn't matter if I like your artwork, don't like your artwork, or hang it on my wall. It's more about the process of creating the artwork that's important. And my job is to appreciate that, not analyze to it, get to the meaning. Let the client arrive at their own meaning in their own time. And there's some other words there which are, you know, equally important, but I won't go into all of it. I guess what I want to nip in the bud is this idea of I'm not creative. So a lot of people will say to me, I'm not going to do art therapy because I'm not creative. And that's kind of the whole point. Art therapy is not about whether or not you think you're an artist or not. So if you ask a child, and that's why I've got this picture up of this child is just in flow. They are making a mess and they are loving it. They are just completely absorbed in what they're doing. And they are in that flow state of abandonment where everything's just channeling through them and they're not putting any of these judgments on top. So if I was to shrink all of you down to your 5-year-old selves and ask this same room, who's an artist, who likes making art, I guarantee most of you would have put your hands up, because you would hear the question based on, do I like making a mess? Do I like creative expression and free abandon? Do I like colour? Do I like, you know, the sensation of the paint? Whatever it is, they're not hearing, have I had an exhibition? Has somebody paid me for my work? You know, has anybody appraised my work and told me it's good enough, etc., etc. So we have to be quite careful, I guess, with clients that have those hang-ups, and also the perfectionism hang-up. It's a really big one. I used to be a perfectionist. I'd like to say I'm a recovering perfectionist. When I make my art now, I'm not really caring about the end outcome, whether or not I will put it on the wall or show it off to anybody else. It's for me, and I'm in my process, and it's for a period of time that I'm allowed to give myself permission to play. And I think that's one of my biggest barriers with, working with clients, is this idea of perfectionism, and it has to look a certain way. So if art's not your thing, that's okay. Transpersonal is not just with visual arts. We also do a lot of things like journaling. We might do some drama work. If music is your thing, then, you could maybe write a song or some lyrics about it. So we go with the client, and we are multimodal. We don't just stick with one particular way of expressing. And there's always something to be said for understanding our story. Even if we think we've told it to ourselves 1,000 times, it's actually even the best reason to look at it again and to take a new angle on it. One of the ones that I really love is the one down the bottom here, which is to tell a story in the phrasing of a children's book. So I was having one particular really rough week during my course and showed up to class very full, not really wanting to get into the heavies again. And my teacher's like, all right, everybody's going to explain their week in one line as if it was a children's book. And this really changed me up because it forced me to think about it in a really playful children's language way. And so my difficult week that had been really heavy and really involved became my life as a human chocolate bar. And then everybody asked me about what does that mean? And I said, well, if you've watched Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Mike TV shrinks himself down, travels through time and space, and shows up on the other side shrunken, like he's like this tiny version of himself. And he's been through this huge ordeal. And that's kind of how I'm feeling. And that really worked. And that's the idea of this common mythology, which I'm about to touch on. So we have this monomyth. I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted in this room who are aware of Joseph Campbell and this idea of the monomyth. But it's really that there's this underlying heroic journey that sits beneath all human experience. And I was just saying to my mum before the break, Mum's like, gosh, people have gone through a lot, haven't they? It's like, yeah, it is. It's a common human experience to go through these trials and ordeals. And so the heroic journey, the idea behind it is that you do go through this kind of typical archetypal journey of like business as usual. There's a call to adventure. Maybe you hear it, maybe you ignore it. Maybe you leap right in, and then you're thrown out of your ordinary business as usual into the unknown. And you descend down this kind of, exploration trail. And that's really a picture of dipping the well again. Can you see how it goes down and underneath? Like that's where the juice is. It's not business as usual up here. It's down here. Yeah. So we're dipping the well here. We're going down, and then eventually we end up in the nadir, and that's like our darkest of dark, hardest of hard, the dark night of the soul, Jung called it. So when we're down in that nadir, that's the real growth point, because something about us has to go. That's when the spiritual death occurs. It's like, I'm holding on so hard to this ideal and it's actually undoing me, and I need to let it go. And then if the client can overcome that, and then we can come out the other side. We resource with things like mentors, allies, gifts, and so on. We look for the strengths and we make our way back out again. And we are not the same. We are changed when we come to the other side. So a typical example of this would be Wizard of Oz. Right? And here's some screen grabs over here. And it's even marked with the black and white, sepia film versus the coloured world of when you go into the subconscious or the unconscious, right? Which has got that knock on the head. So, she goes through all this thing, and then she comes back and she's resurrected, and she's got this new wisdom and knowledge and insight. And the way that she saw things before has drastically changed on the other side. And it's really quite a profound process to go through. And we do this again and again. And part of our role as a therapist is to actually go there ourselves so that we understand what we're asking the client to do. So I want to talk a little bit about what that was like for me. This bottom quote here with knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. I think if you really know yourself really well and you know all of your sticking points, your uncomfortable zones, your patterns and tendencies that don't necessarily serve you well, so that you can catch them out in advance, all this sort of work. Even if I didn't become an art therapist at the end of my course, it would have been still totally worth me doing this course because it was like doing 2 years of therapy, really intensive therapy. And I thought I already knew art therapy. I didn't know transpersonal art therapy. So it really did challenge me and change me for the better. And as said here, you can't go any other way. You have to go your way. So if you enter the forest and you see that there's a really good, easy meandering path that everybody's trod before you, it's that whole Robert Frost thing. Take the path less traveled because it'll actually be your path. And it's one of those things when you step on the way starts opening in front of you. But until you start stepping on your way, you won't find it. So I want to talk a little bit about ritual and how that really opened the heroic journey up for me. I had a real sticking point in my life. I had a story that was very deeply entrenched, and it was a shame story. It was to do with people classifying me in a certain way, shaming me in a certain way. And even though the event had passed, I just couldn't let this go. It was like a real thorn in my side. I often explained it to people. It was like one of those fisherman's hooks that has the backwards barbs so that you can't actually pull it out. Once it's in, it's in. And it was really in me. And no matter how much talking therapy I did, no matter how many times I told this story over and over to people, it just didn't shift, didn't budge until I did my ritual, my course. And briefly, what it involved was a pianola scroll, which I found at an op shop. My grandmother used to have a pianola, and I used to love sitting on her lap and watching the magic of the piano just unfold when you put the roll in the back of it. So I bought this purely for the nostalgic value. I didn't necessarily have a plan for it. However, it is called Sally of My Dreams, which felt rather synchronistic at the time. So I bought this piano roll and I had it for a number of years. And then when this ritual opportunity came around, I suddenly had this epiphany. I was like, that's what the roll's for. So what it briefly involved was sullying the roll. So I tarred and feathered the roll, effectively with black paint and feathers. And I had used this metaphor of being tarred and feathered a number of times vocally, but until I physically tarred this roll and tried to put black paint on it, then pick up feathers and then feel the feathers stick to me and then try and get them off, it really became apparent to me just how much this story had stuck on me. I needed to do it viscerally. I needed to embody this particular process of tarring and feathering. And what was empowering about it was I was doing the tarring and feathering, whereas previously it was others who had tarred and feathered me, right? So I tarred and feathered this roll, and then what I ended up doing was washing my hands and my face. I did a beautiful cleansing thing with a bowl of water and herbs and flowers and, you know, beautiful music and all that sort of stuff. Paul Kelly, Meet Me in the Middle of the Air. If you don't know it, I'll put it on at halftime. And then as a result of feeling cleansed and ready to let go of this, I cut the roll. So I actually used my scissors and I felt what it was like to actually feel the resistance of the paper and make a deliberate cut and say, this story is not my story anymore. And then, can't stop there, you have to kintsugi heal it. So I then took the beginning of the roll and pasted it onto the new bit of roll with a gold repair, kintsugi healing repair, which is the Japanese method of healing pottery. I'm sure you guys already know it. And then I beautified the roll just with some collage, which was all about, you know, starting my story again. But in the philosophy, I guess, of Jung, where everything is integrated, nothing is wasted, this wasn't about whack-a-mole, banish it, and it pops up somewhere else. It's, I know my story, I see my story, I choose to let go of this part of my story, and I will keep instead the new interpretation. So I have kept a note here that says, thank you for everything, so that it's still part of me, but I'm just saying this way is not my way anymore. And then I repaired my scroll. And I did all of this online with all of my classmates watching, and it was the witnessing that actually made it really profound. So it was having somebody actually hold space for me during this process. I had my soundtrack. If I put that soundtrack on again now on my playlist, I'm transported there instantly. It's really powerful. And I had an invocation where I drank a little bit of cordial in a little vial. You know, it's all drama and theatre. but it made me feel like I was drinking the elixir of life, like starting again, you know. And I read out something out loud of like, I promise not to treat myself this way anymore, which was a pact. So you can really get somewhere with this ritual stuff. It sounds confronting, it is, but it's also incredibly cathartic and truly transformational. So I really live for this now with my clients. I'm not going to do this on the first day they come in the door. I'm not going to be like, hey, do you want to try a ritual? Like, no, we're going to build a relationship. We're going to go figure out what their story is. We're going to do all of these other steps in the process first, and then we're going to arrive at a ritual if it feels like something cathartic for them that they want to explore. But that space holding is really key. So, steps along the way, dialoguing. Like I'm doing now, but I'm dialoguing mostly at you. When we dialogue with ourselves, we might return to past events, aspects of our body. We might get recurrent headaches, for example. We might like to dialogue with that headache. Yo, headache, why are you here? Why are you showing up? What's this about? Where have you come from? What's your business? You know, we never do that. We just go take 2 Panadol, make it go away. Yeah. So dialoguing can be really powerful. And in particular, dialoguing with emotions and uncomfortable sensations. So I had one peer of mine, and she's given me permission to share this story, is we were doing empty chair technique. So an empty chair technique, you have 2 chairs, one for the client and one for whatever it is they want to dialogue with. That could be a family member they find it difficult to communicate with, it could be a deceased relative, it could be their boss, it could be their anger and resentment that's always burning inside, whatever it is. You can put it in the empty chair. And then the role of the client is to actually switch and take on that role. So they're not just seeing it from their perspective, they're having to be their boss, be their difficult family member, be the anger and resentment, feel what it's like from that perspective. So with this particular student friend of mine, she was suffering from a lot of grief, and she put grief in the chair. And she said to grief, I'm done with you. Like, I'm so over it. You just show up unannounced all the time. I thought we were done. I thought we dealt with this. You know, I don't understand why you're still hanging around. You're bringing so much, you know, sadness over my life. Please explain effectively. And then I was like, okay, step into the grief chair when you're ready. She went and sat in the grief chair. She was silent for a little while. And I said, what does it mean to hear from this person that she's fed up with you and she doesn't understand why you're here anymore? Please explain. She paused for a long time, and then she shuddered as if something just moved through her body, and she said, I'm here to remind you you're still alive. Oh my gosh, right? Got me right in the feels. Like, I'm here to remind you that you're still alive. Completely different take on the situation. She went from resenting grief to suddenly understand that grief was a blessing, that grief wanted well for her, that grief wanted to remind her to enjoy her life, celebrate her life, do all the things that this particular person she'd lost couldn't do anymore. And all of a sudden, it just shifted, just like that. But she'd never had a real conversation with grief. She'd lived with grief right there on her shoulder, but never once asked it, what's your deal? So it can be incredibly powerful, and it doesn't even involve any art making. It's just the idea of that active imagination and shifting yourself across. And we can also dialogue, as I said, with parts of our body and sensations we might feel. And this course has given me new light into understanding some of those somatic symptoms we might typically medicalize and try and push away. Does anybody know what this is? Does anybody get this experience? Yes? Say it.
Yeah, it's a migraine.
Ocular migraine, yeah. So this is a painting of a person's experience of having an ocular migraine. And this is exactly what happens to me. I never had these until literally the last 5 years or so of my life. I had my first one here when I moved back to Canberra, and it just took over me one day. I just suddenly had this rippling sensation, and I thought, oh, I've got water on my glasses, and I went to clean my glasses, and no, it was still there. And I was sort of like this, and then I was like this, and then I closed my eyes and I could still see it, and I was like, what's going on? And I realized that I was actually having like some sort of medical issue, obviously. And I went to look up on my phone, what am I struggling with here? But I couldn't even see my phone. So I was in this sort of weird panic and I thought I might be having a stroke or, you know, what was going on. And anyway, I learned later it was an ocular migraine. And it just came once and then it didn't come for ages. But then it came again, and then it came again, and then it came quite often. And I thought, gee, I've really got to give this some attention. So of course I went through the typical medical process. I went to my GP referred me to my eye specialist. They did special eye tests, you know, they blew puffs of air in my eye, nodes, some of those things, like, don't know. And with ocular migraines, it's been shown that it's actually nothing to do with your eyes. It's got to do with the blood vessels that connect up with your brain behind your eyes, and they get constricted. So if you're particularly stressed, or you are dehydrated, or you've been doing a lot of eye strain, it can actually like tense the muscles up around the blood vessels, but it's actually nothing to do with your eyes. So it's quite a peculiar phenomena, I guess. And the medical stuff didn't really change whether or not I had these ocular migraines or not. So I thought, I have to change my relationship to these ocular migraines. I need to understand them better. Maybe I can dialogue with them and like go into a bit of a transpersonal approach. And I did. And I want to read you a little story about how I turned this ocular migraine into a bit of a myth that then had a bit of a lesson for me. So the story is called The Hummingbird, the Whirling Dervish, and the Whale. And in typical transpersonal fashion, it's full of symbol, metaphor, and it's kind of a way of taking my lived experience and turning it into something quite magical. So they called her Hummingbird, for her thoughts flitted around tirelessly, and her body went with them, darting from one place to another, this way and that. A busy bee, she would zig and zag through her days in an endless rush, always striving to make up for lost time, yet somehow always late, and too much on her plate, yet always hungry. Searching for the nectar of praise and validation, driven by a constant state of inadequacy, the golden elixir of enoughness always eluded her. She was caught in a people-pleasing spin cycle, helper, carer, cheerleader, the go-to girl, self-sacrificing, rest always eluded her. She barely had time to catch her breath. Her wings beat in a furious hum, hovering in the in-between, rarely landing. The only time she slept, the only time she was still was when she slept. She powered on in this high-stress state, and the threat of burnout remained hidden in her blind spot. I'll come back to that. Until her body started sending her signs she couldn't ignore. The first time it happened, it caught her completely by surprise. Subtly at first, like a drop of rain falling on spectacles. Only she realised she wasn't wearing her spectacles, and this phenomena persisted. She rubbed her eyes, but the blurry splotch only seemed to grow. Was she having a stroke? She closed one eye, still there. She placed a palm over her other eye, still there, and getting bigger still. The blotch grew into a whirling dervish with a rippling pink and green skirt, or a circle of children dancing around the maypole. Oh. Its edges became jagged like a decorative cookie cutter, shimmering jazz hands saying, "Look at me, look at me." She closed both her eyes only to find it there still, dancing on the back of her eyelids like a flickering ribbon of magnetic tape catching the light. This maypole dance in her eye, this swirling, rippling dervish across her field of vision, a message from the body saying, "Stop. Don't you see the swirl that you are caught in? Slow down, rest a while, and take some time to reflect on yourself. I have come to suppress your hum." The maypole effect immobilized the hummingbird, enforcing her into a state of stillness and self-awareness. It turned out to be short-lived, but a dazzling phenomenon, over within an hour. But the maypole effect was still in play, and this hummingbird was grounded for the meantime. There have been numerous sightings of the maypole since, etc., right? So I'm really like going into a whole story here about a whirling dervish that's dancing in my eye. Changed the concept of just a physical phenomenon of what I'm experiencing into a whole story and many associations with it. By the end of it, I realized what my medicine I needed to do was stop and slow down. That was the actual salve, not going to an eye specialist, not getting a new prescription. was actually about the behaviour that was causing this thing to come up in the first place. I don't think that would have been addressed via any of those other conventional means. So my storytelling, my myth making, my dialoguing helped me arrive at this new conclusion that when the whirling dervish shows up in my eye, it has a message for me. Ali, you are far too busy. You're doing far too much. Again, stop it, right? And so that's helped to stop that. I don't have them. Effectively, I very rarely have them anymore. And if I do, I know what they are and what they're trying to tell me. So I just thought I'd share that with you. Here's my whirling dervish. You can see the symbology there and the links. And so I actually now call it, I don't call it an ocular migraine. I say, well, the whirling dervish is back. You know, it changes my relationship to it. All right. I want to talk a little bit just about nature connection. I'm going to check the time. We're doing well. So I also have done an art therapy course that was really focusing on nature-based expressive arts therapy. So using the power of nature as healer and shaman, full of lots of wisdom and inspiration. We know nature teaches us about resilience, about adaptation, about cooperation, if you look at symbiosis and that kind of thing. So there's a lot to be found in nature, perhaps more so than I could ever provide as a therapist. So I humbly take my clients out into nature. I'm very privileged to have a job where I get to do nature connection 3 days a week with clients and take them out and enjoy nature for personal health and wellbeing. But I'm now taking that experience into the therapeutic domain. And so actually doing art therapy with clients out in nature. What I've found is, unlike a clinical space, which often has, 4 walls and a door, nature is big enough to hold any of the big feelings. So when clients come with a lot, it doesn't need to get contained in that claustrophobic environment of a clinical room. I can take it outside with them and we can put it in different places. I have a healing bowl on the table there, which is just made out of raw clay. So it's not been fired. So the idea behind that is that it can go be put in nature as a vessel and that nature can hold whatever emotion's been put in there. So I have clients who use them as whispering bowls. They'll whisper their secrets into the clay bowl. I have clients who use them as screaming bowls and they'll yell and swear and carry on and put them in the bowl and it can go be in nature so they don't have to hold it. So you can take it many different directions. But I encourage you to pick that one up because I just was bashing it to sort of create the opening and it ended up turning into a sort of oyster. And I thought I need to have a little pearl in there. So that just all happened. I didn't think I'm going to make a bowl that looks like this. It's just the process. Whoops, the intention of I'm going to create a bowl, a healing bowl, but I don't know what form it's going to take. And I'll just show you this little one here. It's meant to be my hummingbird from my story. So again, working with some quite challenging materials, natural materials, and noticing how difficult it was to kind of work with those and be with that feeling. This is one where I've actually used my feet to paint, and I've actually dug out different samples of earth from around a particular walking track inside that I find very therapeutic, and I made this underneath my grandmother tree, which is like a very, very old 200, 300-year-old tree that I go and sit with. So you can really find a lot of beauty in nature, even putting yourself into a tree and saying, what do I admire about this tree? Because as humans, we might knock another human being down a peg for not fitting in or not looking quite right or not behaving quite right. If you see a tree in nature that's really resilient, it's fallen over and it's grown up this way, we just go, oh, cool, what an amazing tree. So if you can get clients to appreciate that happens in nature, how can we cultivate that for ourselves? So at this point, I just want to do another little interactive because I've been talking at you for a bit. A simple nature prompt like this is really helpful, engaging a client when they first come in the room, or if you've got a group of clients. This one I can't take credit for. It was passed on to me and it was passed on to her by another therapist. So it's one that goes and does the rounds. But if I was to ask you with your hand to do which lotus bloom you are right now, are you still closed? Are you quite open? Are you need a tea break? Just for funsies, just show me with your hand which lotus bloom you are. Quite open. I'm not so sure. I'm sort of on the precipice there. Closed still. Beautiful. Okay. Doesn't really matter as long as you know for you. You know straight away when you look at that, oh, I'm that one. Or I'm that one moving into that one. Yeah. So just a way of checking in with your feelings. If I asked you how you were feeling, that's a bit of a different question. And you might start thinking about what's a palatable feeling, what's okay for me to say, etc., etc. Another beautiful nature metaphor that I use as an example when we do a process with a group, this is a really good one, is the egg. And these are some artwork here, which again, I've had permission to share with you with a group of women that I consult with. And they all got the same brief. They all got the paper silhouette of an egg, and they all got some poems about eggs. And we did a group activity where we amplified our collective consciousness understanding of what the egg is. So if I was to say to you now, just some words that you associate with egg, Jungian branching freestyle, we put the egg in the middle. Egg. Oh, louder. Let's go. Egg. Space. Thank you. Birth. Oh, here we go. Yolk. Easter. Life. Nutrition. I have people say things like scrambled, broken, fragile. Yeah. Creation, vitality, life source, incubation. Yeah. So there's a lot of associations we have with these eggs. Yeah. And we have come from an egg. We've all come from an egg. So there is this idea of the cosmic egg, and it's a very unifying symbol. So everybody has their own associations. We amplify. So we start small, egg, and then we go, all the different meanings of egg. And then we go, what's your meaning of egg? And we shrink it in, and they find their own personal meaning. And again, with the materials, I don't say, we're going to use any art material you like, because for this particular group, that's too much choice, and they will become paralyzed by choice. So if I say, we're going to work in collage, you've got this amount of time, I suggest you find 10 images you like to start with. These kinds of scaffolding questions and guides are really good. And then we're going to come back together, and then we're going to amplify each other's work. So they'll make their own work for a good half an hour or so, put some music on, come around, I'll help those that are struggling with perfectionism, we'll move past that. And then we move around and they get really into it. It does take them a little bit of time to warm up. It's not an engine that goes 0 to 100 really quickly, but as they start ripping, tearing, looking, changing, swapping, talking, it just all starts to happen. It gets its own traction, and I trust the process. It's the biggest thing I've learned is if you have a good process, it will work. You just have to give it enough time. So these clients are all making their own artwork, and then at the end of making their own artwork, I'll start to give them a warning, just like you would a small child who's having a really fun time and you want them to stop doing what you're doing. You don't say, okay, stop. You actually say, okay, 5 more minutes and we're going to come to a state of completion. For now, there's always more you could do, but does it have the essence of you? That's what we're really looking for, etc. And then what we'll do is we'll do silent reflection, where we'll stand up and we'll walk around the group and we'll look at everybody's artworks. We'll just do a round of just looking and appreciating first. And then I'll get them to take their post-it notes and gift some words of reflection to the others in the group, but it's sort of anonymous because they're not having to directly talk about it. Yeah, it's a bit intimidating face to face. So they'll get up and they'll just put their little post-it, they might notice something. So if, for example, this one, the way to look at this one, I might offer a little reflection, which is, I'm on the wagon. That's something that stood out to me. I'll just write that down and gift it to that person and move along. And then there might be another one that comes up to me and I might notice this one. And I might even just share the word repetition. May or may not resonate with that person. Doesn't matter. That's my gift. I offer it. I'm not offering, love your artwork, it's awesome. Because that's a value judgment and we don't do that. Yeah. So I teach my clients in advance, when we talk about phenomena and we're offering these kinds of words to people, we're not offering an appraisal, we're just offering a noticing and observance. That's it. Okay. I'm going to take the phenomena straight to the queen. That's how I often put it. So you'll have this beautiful visualization of a walled city. If you imagine that that's your client, and they have their walls up and their guard up and their labyrinth to get to them. And there's a messenger that wants to send a message to the queen. If the messenger doesn't have a guard to escort them, chances are they're going to get lost in the labyrinth. And in the labyrinth, there's all sorts of weird backways and alleyways and places we don't really need to go. We just want to go straight to the queen. So that's what I explained to them, that we're really trying to send that phenomena, that noticing, straight to the consciousness without our personal interpretation. It's not about us, it's about them. And this really bonds the group. It's really quite surprising when they do this. So then they're amplifying and mirroring back. Then they come back to their work and they've got all these lovely gifts of all of these words are all here. But this is the really great bit. They don't have to keep them. They are not those things. They can choose. Yes, this resonates with me. Yes, you're on the money there. That's exactly how I was feeling. Oh, I didn't think of that, but now that you've put it there, food for thought, I'll hold that in the holding bag. No, that's definitely not what this artwork is about. They get to choose. And that gives them a real sense of autonomy and control as well, and realizing that they're in charge of their own story. And it's not about pleasing anybody else. It's for them. And then we might distill it into a haiku. So we might take those words that have been gifted to us, take the ones that resonate most for us, and create a little 5-syllable poem just to really juice it all down and get that really distilled essence of what this was about, this whole experience. And it mixes their personal experience with the collective unconscious and brings it all in through that really distilled kind of lens. And that works really, really well for people. And so I take that format and I just change the theme. So instead of an egg, I change it to something else. All right, last up before tea break. I just want to talk about briefly my personal connection with nature through weaving. So weaving has been a really important part of my own personal healing. So if you talk about as a therapeutic practitioner, you're doing all this space holding for other clients, what are you doing for you? Weaving is for me. So I will sit and stitch and just incrementally put myself in my weaving, and it's my version of a mandala. I hate the word mandala because I associate it with colouring stencils that were given to me when I was in hospital. And a nurse would just, I'd be in distress and the nurse would say, here, colour a mandala. I'd be like, so I've hated mandalas for a really long time. That was my association that I was bringing to it. I now understand that it's about just like bringing it into this like safe confines of a circle, noticing patterns, giving yourself the time and attention. So I have changed my relationship to mandala, largely through weaving. And I like to go out and collect natural materials from nature where I can and incorporate them into my weaving. This one in the top left-hand corner, you'll see it's a lot of crest feathers from a soft crested cockatoo. And unfortunately, I found that cockatoo deceased by the side of the road when I was out on a walk. And I decided that I wanted to pay reverence to that bird because soft crested cockatoo was my favourite bird growing up as a child. And it felt really prominent. This bird was in my care that this happened. And it felt, again, if you look at that dark night of the soul of something has to die, it really caused me to reflect at that particular time of like, is there a part of my childhood that I need to address here? Or my inner child, has she been neglected for a while? And this bird's shown up to go, hello. Like, so it's interesting how things come in and out of your world, and anything can become an art material, I guess. And this is an example of what I do. I take photos in nature and then I transpose those particular places into weavings. So this is a pond I like to sit and contemplate by, and I've turned it into a basket. And I've got that basket in so you can have a hold of it. So yeah, there's some examples of the mandala that I was talking about. And Jung was really a big fan, obviously, of the mandala, and he found a lot of personal reverence in doing the mandala practice. So I'm going to finish with this poem, which I feel is very pertinent timing since we're talking about circles and, you know, weaving and things coming around again. This is a poem that I discovered during my course, particularly in relevance to the circle and mandala, but it's from an Aboriginal point of view. And this poet's name is Holliday. And I'm going to do my best to pronounce her country right, but I might not, but I'm sure she'll channel the vibes. So I was born Yankun Chichara. My mother is Yankun Chichara. My father was Yankun Chichara. My family is Yankun Chichara. I have learned many things from family elders. I have grown to realise that my life travels in circles. My Aboriginal culture has taught me that universal life is circular. When I was born, I was not allowed to live with my family. I grew up in the white man's world. We lived in a square house. We picked fruits and vegetables from neatly fenced square plots. We kept animals in square paddocks. We sat and ate at a square table. We sat on square chairs. I slept in a square bed. I looked at myself in a square mirror and did not know who I was. One day I met my mother. I just knew that this meeting was part of our healing circle. Then I began to travel. I visited places that I had been before, but this time I sat down with family. We gathered closely together by big round campfires. We ate bush tucker, feasting on round ants and berries. We ate meat from animals that lived in round burrows. We slept in circles on beaches around our fires. We sat in the dirt on our land that belongs to a big round planet. We watched the moon grow into a magnificent yellow circle. That was our time. I have learnt 2 different ways now, and I am thankful for this. That is part of my life circle. My heart is round like a drum, ready to echo the music of my family. But the square within me still remains. The square hole stops me in my entirety. And I would like to just consider the circle and squares that we are presented with coming up, and use my personal position to voice this. I often can't with my work because I'm caught in a position of neutrality and I have to just keep mum. But when it comes to this and my transpersonal work, I really feel it's very important. So consider the square that you're going to be presented with and consider the circle. And that's break, something to think about. Good. No worries.
Right, you can all stand up, go to the kitchen, serve yourself a cup of tea, and then come and have something yummy over here to eat. And mingle with each other and get to know a few people. Because there's some people that I've worked here at this very art therapy together, and we can ask questions. And she'll can fill us in with these interesting statements. Okay?
Okay. Do you want me to talk a bit about that, Jean, or are you going to?
Yeah, if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly.
Mention that at the end.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Back in. How's that level? Okay. Okay. I just want to click. So I guess I'm here to field any comments, questions, considerations, percolations, any of the above. It's a chance to kind of dialogue a bit with each other now instead of me just talking to you. Are we doing the mic, Robert, for people? Do you want people in the crowd to speak into this one, or?
No,
For the Zoom
we'll
or-
walk around with.
Yeah. Do you want this one or your one?
Oh, no, I'll look after the.
Want me to walk this one around? Is that what you mean?
No, we've got another one, so.
That other one? Okay. Well, this other lady wants to. Okay. You're in chief seats. You're just talking to that. It's not going to amplify your voice for the room. It's just going to record it.
This is for the Zoom.
So you can talk normally.
Can I remember my question? Does that work?
It is. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I was wondering if you might be interested in talking about working with colour with people. Do you do that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Colour is one of those foundational things, but what is a colour to me might be a different colour to someone else. And so that's, again, when we really have to do that meaning making and clarification, inquiring into. So if the client's making an artwork and they're using a lot of blue, the phenomenological thing for me to say would be, and I notice you've used a lot of blue. What does blue symbolize for you? Or is that significant? Is that a significant choice? What does it represent for you? If they use a lot of red, I'm not going to assume that means anger. It could be passion, could be life force, it could be their favourite colour, it could be a childhood colour, it could be, I've got no idea. What I notice often is that there will be a recurrence where a client is drawn to a particular colour or a motif. And so when you notice that starting to come out over time, then inquiring into that, like, oh, I notice it's green again. Tell me about the green, I think that it's really interesting. Have you ever played Pews and Cues? There's this new board game called Hues and Cues, which is basically, I thought about bringing it tonight to put it on. It's a large board of pretty much all the colours of the visual colour spectrum in all their subtleties. So there's probably like, you know, 20, 30 blues, and they're marginally separate from one another. And the way the game is played is that you provide a cue for everyone. So I could say Cookie Monster, and then you'll be like, oh, Cookie Monster blue. And you'll put your, or you know, that tablecloth or whatever. So it's an associate with sunflower. If I said sunflower, I'm not allowed to say the word yellow, but I can say sunflower, and then you'll have to put your piece on the appropriate yellow that you think represents sunflowers. And it's really interesting to see just how many people interpret colours differently. So it can be really variable. I like to sometimes restrict palettes and things when it comes to materials, but I think having the full spectrum of colour is quite important for a client. What I find really useful with colour is that it's often linked to sensations and emotions. So for example, with one client, I was doing again empty chair work, and they put their burning resentment in the chair. It ended up getting a name, it ended up getting like a whole personality, but it was always this burning volcanic like red. And then that would show up in the artworks to represent that part of themselves. Even if they weren't drawing that whole thing, the red will be associated with that part. Yeah, that's why watercolor can be so great, because it blends and bleeds over, and you can have layers and layers. So it's good to play within that sense. Yeah. No, I work with their symbology. Yes. So it can be helpful for me to understand with dream work, for example, that usually if a house shows up in a dream, the house is usually a symbol of the self. Like what I've learned, which is fascinating to me in dreams, is that everything that shows up in your dream is a part of you. So if my ex-boyfriend shows up in my dream, or if my old boss shows up in my dream, or whatever it is, it's not about them showing up. It's about what are my associations with them? What's my relationship with them? How did they make me feel? What am I holding on to as them as a symbol? And it can be quite distressing for somebody to have this person show up in their dream and think, oh, am I not over this person, or have I not got past that, or whatever. No, that's an association with the feeling. And the feeling can be recurrent in different times of your life, and this thing just shows up to say, hey, hey, me again. So it's really important to understand the client's symbology. So I would encourage them not to go buy a book to read about what symbols mean, but to get them to think about what it means for themselves. So they might create their own codex, where if they're doing dream journaling or artwork journaling, I'm just going to grab some of my artworks. All right. Oh, yeah. It's back on. Sorry, just checking if you're all alive with that electric impulse. So this artwork, for example, which you see on the table, has this turtle figures and this little person running into the distance, really. And the turtle is something that continues to show up in my art. Now, if I just went and looked up a symbol book about what does a turtle represent, I might get a whole bunch of disparate meanings about that, but it's about what does it really mean to me. And this would be interesting for my mum. So the turtle for me has come to represent my birth mother and the presence of her in my life, but also not, because the turtle lays its eggs on the beach, and the same beach it was born, it manages to find its way back to the same beach, even though it's got no other reference other than some sort of, you know, magnetic meridian in its head. it knows to go back to the same beach. Even if it's been like 10, 15 years since it's been to that beach, it knows when it comes of age to go back to that beach. And the turtle never sees its mother. The eggs are laid on the beach, they hatch and they're on their own. That's it. And I'm adopted from birth, so I never got to meet my mother. And so for me, the turtle has become a symbol of that relationship. Now that's highly personal, right? Yeah. So you're welcome. So, you know, the turtle continues to show up in my artwork, which is, it's about my mother, but it's actually about me. It's actually about my adoption story and about me being on my own, and that I have this fierce independence where I think I can't rely on anybody else, so I'll do it myself. It's actually a really disruptive quality in my life because it doesn't let me trust other people. It doesn't let me hand over responsibility to other people. But then I'm always resentful that like, oh, I just have to do everything myself. But I just said that I want to do it all myself, right? So the turtle shows up. So it's all those things. It's all those meanings in this one little picture, you know, and I could draw it very simply and we'd know that's turtle. So I would be very careful of telling the client to go look elsewhere because the whole point is to make them look within themselves. Yeah. I did have one gentleman I recently got a lot out of, Mauro is his name. He runs, he's a psychologist, trained psychologist, but teaches men, takes men out on boats on the Hawkesbury River. And that's his therapy office. So he takes them out on the boats and they fish and they talk and they do therapy on the boat. And I went to this great session with him whereby all these therapists showed up to like try and get him to teach them the same way you would send someone to a book to go look at symbols. You know, Mauro, tell me how to be a nature therapist that like does this stuff. So everybody arrived at his session and he was so cheeky. He just sat there in his chair and he's like, all right, so just want to know like why you're all here, what you want to get out of this. You know, we're all sharing our insecurities and what we want to get out of it. And please give us guidance and please, you know, direct us. And he's like, all right, we're just going to go for a walk down the river now for about 15 minutes and just go looking, just see whatever you're looking for and just come back in 15 minutes, you know. And we were like, what? Like, we've come to your session. We've like given time out of our conference to like come and be with you. We've come to listen to you. What's going on? We couldn't understand. We all went off and did our wonderings or whatever. Sure enough, you listen to yourself for 15 minutes. You found the answer. It's unbelievable. We all came back. And he was like, so how'd you go? Find what you're looking for? And we were all like, yep. It was amazing. Amazing.
Money to go for a walk on their own.
Yes. No, really, because this is the skill. And this is the problem with therapy, is that it's sold as the golden ticket, the silver bullet, just come do this number of sessions and you'll be fine or whatever. And that the therapist is in the position of the healer and the therapist knows more than you. No, they don't. They just know how to ask you the questions you don't know how to ask yourself. And that's the tricky bit for me that I'm still sitting with as a therapist. And this is why it's so important to do your own work and understand yourself, is that if I am a people pleaser by nature, which I am, that's going to be very dangerous in therapy if I just want to please my client. If I want to make my client feel good, if I want to make my client feel salved and have a positive experience or whatever, versus I put my client in the hot seat, I ask them the hard questions. And that's why we have clinical supervision. It's really important that the therapist also has a therapist that they get to go and see and talk to about that kind of thing. Yeah. So that would be, I wouldn't send them to book. I find it very interesting that there are these books that exist. But I would strongly encourage you to figure out your own symbology. Yeah.
Just a thought about the inadequacy of language, because, you know, people say, what do you do for a living? You say, oh, I'm a talking therapist, you know. Well, you're going far beyond that now, we know. The problem with English is when the doctor says, how are you going? What is your problem? And you say, oh, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm angry, whatever it is. I think some other, and that's terribly inadequate, of course, because you can't identify, it's not very useful to identify yourself entirely with some other problem like that. Some other languages, maybe Spanish, Jeff, they use it more to say, I have anger or I have happiness. I have rather than I am, because the use of identity is so dangerous. When you say, well, I am angry, you know, resentful, whatever the problem is. I wonder to what extent you deal with that. You did talk early on about how important it is not to, to lose your professional dispassion and so forth, go through the gate as opposed to communicating through it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the question of language, I find, is quite important, and of course you're moving beyond it with art.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a few things that come to mind for me. One is that when I'm talking to you right now and throughout this whole, presentation that I've given you, I've been forced to make my thoughts come out of my mouth through this small sieve, this tiny hole, this funnel that is my mouth. And to do that, I have to actually translate what's going on up here and get it to come out in order. And I might actually be having a completely separate thought at the same time the words are somehow coming out of my mouth. It's like when you drive a car and you realise you're home and you forgot how you actually got home. So there's bypassing that can happen. So with language, it's about slowing down. I think that's really, really key to actually not just speak under pressure, but actually consider and ponder and do the internal dialoguing and thinking. However, saying things out loud is also still really important, because we could meditate over things in our head and ruminate and get to know them really well internally, but until we actually have to push them out through our mouth and speak them out into incantation in the world, we don't actually make them tangible, real, audible. Again, why witnessing is so important. I could say it to myself, I'm unhappy, I'm unhappy, I'm unhappy in my head. And then I could say, I'm unhappy, Robert. And then I've actually made it go somewhere. But then you as the therapist could say to me, unhappy. Shall we feel into that for a minute? What is the state of unhappiness? Let's put unhappiness in the middle, like the egg that we did before. Unhappiness. I feel unfulfilled. Oh, okay, that's a subtlety. That's a difference. Unhappiness. I'm disappointed. I'm lonely. It's a different kind of social condition. Unhappiness. So we could come back to what is the unhappiness and how does it show up? What's different about when we then move into a mapping stage or an art expressive therapy stage is that we then allow multiple things to coexist at once on one plane. So instead of having to be linear, one word after the other, all the words can exist at once, all in one place, and I can sort of geolocate myself in spatial awareness. And that's why it's really important we locate them in the body as well. And we get clients to get out of their head. With words, because that's where language can actually do a disservice. So it's not just with the visual, it's also with the sensations that are coming on. Speaking them out loud is really important. If I'm with a client and I put them into a sort of guided visualization where I'm getting them to do a body scan, I'm getting them to come into their body, get them safe, get them grounded, get them kind of, relaxed and calm. And then I'll drop the inquiry like a pebble in the pond, and I'll be like, I have one client, for example, who says, I'm not disciplined enough. That's one of their stories that they tell themselves, I'm not disciplined enough. And so I'll say, I'm going to drop, I'm not disciplined enough. Where does that thought live? And they'll say, in my head. And I'll be like, okay, so it's actually physically located upstairs. Like that's where it lives in your body, this thought. What does it look like, that thought? Like if we could give it an actual persona or a kind of, form, not just an abstract thought. Oh, it's a man that stands there like this and shakes his finger at me. He's old man and he sits in his recliner, but he's happy to stand up and tell me I'm not doing enough, like I'm not disciplined enough. I'm like, oh, interesting. Okay. And so once we then have that picture to go with the thought, it no longer becomes this negative loop that is simply, I'm not good enough, I'm not doing enough, I'm not disciplined enough, abstract. It's actually, I see you up there and I'm telling you, I'm going on holiday, I'm not listening to your broadcast, I'm going to take away your microphone, you don't get to say that to me anymore, and then take themselves somewhere else in their body where joy lives or where fulfillment lives. And we actually go through that process. So language is really important. If they didn't tell me that verbally, or journal it and then tell me, we wouldn't get it out. So language is important, but it's not the end. If that makes sense.
Yes. This is all sort of new to me, so thanks for filling me in on it. A lot of my life has been working with people in trauma but in collective trauma. You know, I was in Chile during the Pinochet dictatorship, and then in Argentina through the reconstruction of democracy, and then Salvador in the Civil War, 1979 to 1989, and more recently in South Sudan during the period of the Civil War. Now, all of those events were very different, but they had a lot in common in terms of class war, tribal war, and generally tribalism. And the sort of trauma that people went through wasn't just individual trauma, which I think you're responding to, but it was actually collective community trauma.
Yes.
Okay. And people would say to me, you know, look, I'm not a therapist. I know nothing about therapy, but they would say to me, you know, in their own ways, particularly in Latin America, less so in Africa, where this sort of stuff isn't well known, but they would say to me, look, you know, these sorts of therapies are useless, because in the end, we've got to do it to the whole of society, to the people who are the victims and the people who are the abusers. So it's a big question, but I mean, what's your response to that when you have a collective trauma right across society, which no one seems to know what to do or how to deal with it?
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely, I don't have an easy answer for it. There's a lot of people I look to for inspiration in this field who do interventionist type art, where they take therapy onto the street. They do huge community artworks. They do collaborative pieces whereby everybody does a small swatch that ends up being a big piece. So people are still working on their individual stuff, but they're doing it together. Yeah. And then I would say, like, I turn to Esther Perel a lot about this. She's one of my favorite therapists that I look to a lot of guidance from, and she speaks as a child of a Holocaust survivor. Parents, both her parents were the only survivors of their families. And she speaks about there's two different kinds of people that really come out of that, out of that heroic journey experience. There's the ones who survived and just got through it and are still living with the repercussions and the pain and everything else, and it defines their life. And they often then pass it on to their children because they don't share what happened to them because they want to protect them. So then they get scaffolded and cut off from their culture and whatever. And then there's also those that speak about it too openly, and, you know, it becomes their whole story and nothing else, and it's their defining feature. And then there's the people who actually, like, come back to life from it, like use it as an excuse to actually revitalize their life and, like, reclaim their life, and they really thrive after that. And I think that you can't do the work for any of these communities, but you can certainly provide a space. And if you want to look at the well again, the idea of a well is that it's a central gathering point where everybody gets sustenance from. Everybody gathers at the well. Animals all gather at a waterhole. That's what they do. It's essential for life survival. And I would actually say that this whole idea of delving into the consciousness and the experience and the human experience and unpacking that, and story sharing, all the stuff that I put in my presentation is essential to actually recovering and getting past those kinds of collective traumas. It's not the work of one therapist, it's the work of many, and it has to be a kind of concerted effort across the board. And therapy alone won't do it. It's also got to be the mechanisms, you know, very basic things like housing, you know, health, all that stuff all has to be there for it to work. I will say that I was really inspired by narrative therapy, which came out of Africa following, I guess, children that were conscripted into guerrilla armies and sometimes had to kill their own family members, you know, and were heavily traumatized. And there was a whole generation of them after this, you know, experience. And they came up with this idea of the tree as a worldwide symbol that every child could relate to, and using the tree to look at your preferred identity. So not the identity of what has happened to you that you've become so fused with. I'm a guerrilla soldier, I did bad things, I'm an awful person. Your preferred identity. That's huge for shifting trauma at that level. Yeah, what would you like to be? Who are you in essence? And you work your way up from the roots of the tree all the way through to the crown. I did this in hospital myself to get diffused from my patient story. You know, once you get in the system, it can become very much, it becomes your identity. I'm a sick person, I'm a sick person, I'm a sick person. So actually trying to come through and figure out what's not that story, all the way from the roots to the canopy. So your roots is you're acknowledging where you come from, but you're as much a child of the stars as you are a guerrilla army child. You're children of nature. You're playful. You're wherever you've come from that you have positive memories with, etc., etc. So you can focus always on the positive, not at the expense of the negative. The negative exists, but putting the energy into the positive. After healing, preferred identity. Yeah. Esther Perel. Yeah, Esther Perel. She's big. And then narrative therapy. I can't remember the institute that started it. It's gone out of my head, but the narrative therapy tree is something you can look up online, and it's really powerful. I use it a lot with clients.
Yeah, just very briefly, our son Christopher in Melbourne is very much into art, into drama. He's a thespian spirit, you know. After the Black Saturday fires in Victoria, you know, what was it, 140 killed and 2,000 houses, whatever it was, yeah, around Gippsland. Chris was involved in a group doing drama therapy with the people lost their houses, and some of them lost people and so forth. And that was a bit different from Jeff's experience, which I think was largely focused on conflict. So the people that you might be working with come from different points of view. Chris's experience was where they have so much in common, you know, which is a different sort of a trauma, and which would be very supportive, but it's always inadequate, you know, in really solving problems, but certainly giving people support. So that was just another approach to working with a group trauma, where people have a lot to offer each other.
They do, exactly. And I think that's part of it. That's why I love group work so much, is actually so much therapy and healing happens just in the conversations in the group and just in the reflections. And I can just sort of sit back and watch it all happen. It's quite powerful. So when you give people the tools to express themselves through processes, materials, prompts, etc., and then when you give them the space to feel heard, and you give them the scaffolds around the language, which we've spoken about, you know, of we're not approving of this person's artwork or not, we're just offering them a reflection on the artwork. Once you give them the scaffolding about that, it just works. And humans are hungry for this. This is what we live for. We've always kind of gathered in this way and shared in this way, and we're just, like I said, remembering it. So, and I don't ever underestimate the power of just holding space for somebody. I did a project when I lived in Melbourne. I'm a bit of a Grinch. I hate Christmas. I hate the commercialism aspect of Christmas. And I hate just everybody running around, you know, sort of headless chooks, not even paying attention to who's next to them, whatever. So I decided, how can I change this? And I started doing green tea ceremony. So I would just sit one-on-one, empty cushion opposite me, yoga mat, cushion, tea, enough hot water for one bowl of tea, you know, perhaps some nice little objects or whatever. And I would just sit and wait for someone to sit down. And it was amazing how many people would just, you know, all about their lives or whatever. It was a real like meditation for me, just to notice everything that was going on. And then you see this woman with like 10 bags doing all of her shopping for her whole family or whatever. She'd go, well, she'd look at me, I'd go, she'd go, and I'd be like, all no words whatsoever. And she'd be just go, okay, she'd go back down, she'd sit down. And then I'd just say to her, you know, like, I put something up for the smell, and I, you know, cleanse her or whatever with my colour center or feather to kind of, you know, whatever, just, you know, basically just giving her some attention and time, pretty much. And no talking. And I just tell her, you know, whatever. And then I'd make the tea. I'd get her to listen to the tea, I'd get her to smell the tea, and then I'd get her tea. And this was transformational, absolutely transformational. A cry, you know, by the end of this, you know, It's quite remarkable. So again, at a group scale, it's about providing a table where everybody can sit down and have a cup of tea and make the tea and be part of the team and like, you know, share the tea with someone else and facilitate those opportunities for people. You know, I would say like, as far as personal trauma goes, like when there's collective trauma, what can often happen is because everybody's dealing with it, what happens is I've not got it as bad as you. So, you know, I didn't lose my house in the fires, but I did lose my dog, or, you know, my house was only half burnt or whatever. And so people start diminishing compared to others what their experience is. And actually it's sort of about creating a dialogue where everybody's suffering is suffering. Suffering is actually, you don't dilute it. If it's there, it's there. If it's in the water at all, just one drop, it's there. So we all have to just kind of hold space for that. Yeah. Anything else? I will talk about how you can come and enjoy some nature briefly. So tomorrow, Jean and Robert are hosting a gathering at Grevillea Park in conjunction with the Jungian Society, but also others are welcome to come along. I work for Landcare ACT and I run their Wellbeing Through Nature program, and that's really focused on getting people to connect with nature for their own personal health and wellbeing, not just environmental outcomes. So we're usually a conservation-based organisation, but this money has come from Department of Health. So it's really trying to get people to get back out and enjoy nature for the personal health and healing benefits. So I'll be running some meditation activities and some creative expression. There's some flyers. You're welcome to take one. It's from 10 till 12. Jane will put on the spread as per usual because she can't not. Yeah, and up on the back when you get to it's at Claire Holland House pretty much. So when you drive in towards Claire Holland House, you can just park on the grass next to the garden. That's the easiest place to kind of come in and park. And we're just doing a very relaxed session for 2 hours. You can bring your nature journaling if you've got anything like that, a yoga mat or cushion to sit on, and we're just going to spend some time in nature. Good.
Thank you. Something else for you to certificate.
Oh,
And some other thing to look after
certificate.
as well.
Thank you.
So thank you for coming and the extraordinary night that we've had. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you for your efforts. So Sally's already talked about tomorrow. So we have a special garden there. Do you want to say something about that garden?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
so also Carolyn's in the room, but Carolyn came to me having come to a few I guess nature connection events through Landcare and said, I've got this idea, I want to do a Marion Griffin garden to celebrate the life of Marion Griffin and her contribution to Canberra and her connection. Because she's often been overlooked. Walter's, you know, got the design and the history and everything. So the idea was to really honour her contribution and celebrate her. We've since found out that she was the one that actually said, Walter, I'm going to divorce you if you don't get those designs in for that competition. And she actually did all the drawings and everything as well. So we do have her to thank for this beautiful city we live in. So we started a little garden in her honour on the 14th of February, which is also Valentine's Day. So we gave Marion some love.
It's her birthday.
And we put some plants in just next to the Environment Meditation and Healing Garden with a view that that garden will be a gathering place for people to come to be.
And also, so tomorrow you're saying if we make money, will go towards that garden because we need to develop it more. It's only a small garden, but we'd like to develop that. So any contributions tomorrow will go towards developing that, more with getting more plants and more area. It's only a small area at the moment, but we like to extend that with new plants.
The meditation garden and the interfaith garden has been there for a long time.
12 years.
Very well.
And we're celebrating, and you're very welcome to come along on the 8th of October. We'll be having a big celebration, and we have people from different cultures coming in and doing their dance and singing and poetry and whatever, and they all come together on the 8th. So we'll send you a note about that because it's a very, very good occasion. and very nice with different people we could meet. So I'd like to really thank you for your efforts. I mean, you've gone through a huge lot of effort to come tonight with your artworks and all the different things that you brought in.